Good evening, everyone. Very warm welcome once again. It is truly a privilege for us that we have with us Mr. Piyush Goyal, the Honorable Minister of State with independent charge for power, coal, and new and renewable energy with us today evening. Despite his really busy schedule, the minister has kindly agreed to release Mr. Kohli's book and also share his perspectives on the themes raised in the book with us. Thank you very much, sir. First, we'd like to present a small bouquet as a real token of our appreciation for you having made the time to join us this evening. Thank you so much. I'd like to now invite Dr. Ishar Judge Ahluwalia, the chairperson of ICRIER, to make the welcome remarks.
Thank you, Sanjana. Piyush Ji, the Honorable Minister for Coal, Power, New and Renewable Energy, a long title. Mr. Harinder Kohli, author and editor of the book that we are going to be launching, Mr. Ninan, Mr. Montek Ahluwalia, Arunabha Ghosh, and Mr. Sivaramakrishnan from the Oxford University Press. Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this function. This book, The World in 2050, Striving for a More Just, Prosperous and Harmonious Global Community, edited by Harinder Kohli, had a global launch about a month ago, 6 weeks ago in Paris. I had the privilege to be present at the Bank of France, where the book was launched. And we felt that in India, normally we are so busy with tomorrow and maybe day after tomorrow that we have no time to think of 2030 even, let alone 2050. And India is a world in itself, so we don't think enough about the world and how we fit into the world and how we need to reshape the world to fit into it. So given all those things, I requested Mr. Kohli that at ICRIER we would really like to launch this book, and if he could come, that we would like to have a panel discussion on the book. We have very limited time. Now, Piyush Ji, you must give us 15 minutes more because we started late because of you. And I had planned everything within an hour because you said 6 to 7. So give us till 7:15. And I should only speak for 3 minutes because you'll hear about the book from Mr. Kohli. But there are a few things that I'd like to draw your attention to. First, the book is frighteningly heavy and big. And you really have to be a committed academic to actually open it and read it. So I'm very impressed with your first remarks when you came, saying it's brilliant, and you've obviously taken the trouble to find a desk where you can open the book and read it. Some of it has a number of chapters by some very eminent people with experience, expertise, and of the real world, not just of theory. And for example, we have an article by Where Will Emerging Markets Stand in Global Trade by Pascal Lamy. We have a chapter by Potential Technological Landscape in 2050 by Dr. Mashelkar. We have The State of Global Governance by Montek Ahluwalia. We have Demographics and Urbanization by Gregory Ingram. Gurcharan, there's a seat right here. Please come. And there's an epilogue by Michelle Kamdasu and Harinder Kohli. Now, the panelists will be touching on only some of the themes, because the book is really very varied. And as I understand, Mr. Ninan will speak on the rise of emerging economies and implications for global governance, as well as mega trends and global challenges ahead. Montek will speak on trade, technology, and poverty and inequality. And Arunabha will be speaking on climate change, water, and possibly food security. Now, there are two other themes which our speakers would not be touching on, but which are very, very important for us in India. One is the demographics, and the other is urbanization. So, Harinder, I would like you, in your presentation, in introducing the book, to say a little bit more on these two. It's not because we think that these are not important, but I had given the authors, the panelists, the choice to pick whichever areas they'll be speaking on. And I'd like you to emphasize those. What we will do is, I will first invite Mr. Shiva Ramakrishnan, the Managing Director of OUP, the publishers of the book, to say a few words. Then we'll have Mr. Kohli presenting the book with some remarks. Then we'll have the minister releasing the book, and we would like the minister to share with us his reactions to the book. And then we have the three panelists. Now, all the people here are very well known to you, so and the bios are in your folders, but I have to share a couple of things about Mr. Goel. And why? Because I know that he's a politician, I know he's from a political family, I know that he's also connected with the NGO world through his better half, but what I didn't know, and I'm very happy to read, which is that he has had a brilliant academic record, All India second rank holder, chartered accountant, and second rank holder in law in Mumbai University. You know, in our parts of the world, these things are valued much more than being a minister. So let's give him a hand. And what is more, he's been trained in leadership at none other than Yale, Oxford, Princeton, and Harvard. So with all, Harvard is it's ongoing. I wasn't sure, so I didn't say ongoing. But they have very little to add after you've done these other three, right? So with all that in the background, I think we are really looking forward to hearing your responses to World by 2050 as seen by these worthies who have written. Montek actually has contributed a chapter to the book, so we really look forward to Harinder's introduction also. But before all of that, Mr. Shiva Ramakrishnan, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahluwalia. I must confess I'm completely out of sorts and out of place in this august company. My first tryst with economics, I will confess, in college ended in disaster. Professor Vivek Debroy failed me. And I remember the conversation that evening with my dad, and I said 38 out of 40 of us got the same grade. And then my first managing director in professional life, Mr. Ghosh walks in here, so I am a little overwhelmed at this point in time. But on behalf of Oxford University Press, I welcome you all to the launch of The World in 2050, Striving for a More Just, Prosperous and Harmonious Global Community by Dr. Harinder Kohli. It's our privilege to have the Honorable Minister for Power, Coal, New and Renewable Energy, Mr. Piyush Goyal, with us. And along with him, a distinguished panel, Mr. T.N. Ninan, Dr. Kohli, Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, and Dr. Arunabha Ghosh. I welcome you all. This book is an analytically rigorous exploration of the future of global markets by top economists and policymakers. It takes a long-term perspective of the economic, social, and political outlook of the world in 2050. And Dr. Kohli argues among others, that for a prosperous economic order, convergence of large developing economies led by East Asia and India with the developed world is crucial given the former share of the global GDP. It is a very welcome addition to the growing array of books we publish as OUP in economics. It is an area which is of core interest to us. Our authors range from classical thinkers to modern masters, including 20th century Nobel Prize winners. I have the privilege of giving a brief introduction as well to all of the panelists here. Ishar, I won't take too long. You did steal my line on the ranking. That was really on Mr. Piyush Goyal. So I thought I would have that piece of statistic that you wouldn't come up with. Mr. Goyal has also been a well-known investment banker, has advised top corporates on management strategy and growth, and served on the board of India's largest commercial bank, the State Bank of India, and also the Bank of Baroda. I extend a very warm welcome to our guest of honor, sir. Starting with Mr. T.N. Ninan, an award-winning journalist and one of India's most respected economic editors. He's edited top publications. He's been the editor of the Business Standard, the Economic Times, Business World, India Today. He served as chairman and member of the governing boards of a lot of non-profit bodies, and was honored with the B.D. Goenka Award for Excellence in Journalism. Good evening and welcome, Mr. Ninan. Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia was former Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission of India, a key figure in the Indian economic process. He was also awarded the Padma Vibhushan, India's second highest civilian honor, by the President of India in 2011 for his outstanding contribution to economic policy and public service. Welcome, sir. Dr. Arunabha Ghosh has been CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, CEEW, since its founding in August 2010. He's worked in across 37 countries, previously worked in Princeton, Oxford. Now there's a common theme among a lot of the panelists here. He's a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, Asia Society's Asia 21 Young Leader, and Fellow of the Aspen Global Leadership Network. Welcome. Dr. Harinder Kohli is the founding director and chief executive of Emerging Markets Forum, as well as founding director, president, and CEO of Centennial Group International, both based in Washington, D.C. Prior to his current ventures, he served for over 25 years in various senior managerial positions at the World Bank. He's written extensively on the emergence of Asia, Latin America, Africa, and other emerging market economies. Dr. Kohli is currently leading an EMF study on the long-term prospects of emerging market economies worldwide. In organizing this evening and the venture, I'd like to thank Dr. Isha Judge Ahluwalia and ICRIER, an organization we've been very proud to associate with at several key platforms. They've extended their support and participated in launching this key book. Thank you very much, and welcome to all of you.
Isha, thank you very much for your kind introduction. And Ishar and Rajat, thank you very much for organizing this event at ICRIER. And Minister, very kind of you joining us today. It's a great honor. And friends, it's wonderful to see so many familiar faces going back to our young days. And I must say that while the global launch of the book was in Paris on August 11-12, it's really a privilege and honor to launch it in what was my hometown many years ago, and launch it in a place, the book is World in 2050, to launch it where I think the world is coming to, which is Asia and India, and that's what the book's main message is. I must confess, I'm an optimist. Many economists like to be pessimists, but I am an optimist, and I must make that confession right up front. Now, I'd like to say three things in the 12 minutes that Isher has assigned to me. First, I'm the face. I represent 26 authors who are behind this book, who have written 18 chapters on very different, diverse subjects, which are interconnected. If I had a role to play, which was to select what those 18 chapters would be, in the process, we had to not have some chapters on important topics, and then persuade 26 very prominent people from around the world to agree to write the chapters and to deliver them on time, and then make sense between the chapters. That's my small contribution. These 26 authors come from a dozen different countries and different cultures. And we tried to make sure there was no ideological bias. Many of those authors are from India, and three of us are in this room. In addition to Montek, there is Ram Agarwal sitting here, and you'll hear from Montek in a few minutes. As Isher mentioned, there's normally a tendency not only to basically focus on today or tomorrow, not to look at 2030, but very often, Isher, actually we think of yesterday. Okay? But I want to remind you that 2050 may look long distance, very far away. But in matter of fact, it's not that far away. It's how many years away? Just think of, instead of looking forward, think of 1985. I'm sure you can remember 1985 very vividly. Was it that far back? I would submit no. So if 1985 was not that far back, 2050 is not that far away. It will be here before you know. Things don't change that fast. If we want to change the world, if we want to change India, if we want to change Asia, we must look at 2050 and figure out where we want to be and how would we get there. And that was the purpose of the book, I would submit. The book is about cross-cutting issues. So that's my first point. That's why the book was written about 2050. Okay? And I just want to submit, in 2047, India would be 100 years old as a free nation. We need to think about where do we want this country to be 100 years after independence. So please think of that. And that's what Ram was writing about when he wrote his book, in my view. So that's my first point. Now, like any book, any document which talks about long term, you have to think about what are the fundamental forces which will drive the future. And that's the second point I want to come to. In looking at the future and looking at the world, we found out, after deep reflection, that there are some fundamental trends, what we call mega trends, which will affect all countries, big and small, developed and developing. The world is coming together. We are getting more and more intertwined. And these forces will affect not only India's and China's and Burma and Nepal, they will affect Asia as a whole, Africa, but actually developed and developing countries alike, to a small degree or big degree, but increasingly alike. The old boundaries between developed and developing countries are dissipating. And by 2050, they would have disappeared more and more. And that's what the mega trends are all about. I don't have the time to discuss all of them in any detail. Actually, they're being flashed around while we are talking. And the pictures in the book are to intrigue you about them. The pictures were selected around megatrends and chapters and countries. And each picture has a meaning behind it in the book. So when you have a time, take a look at it. Take a look at each of the pictures. Our people took days and weeks in selecting pictures from around the world to convey the messages. But the megatrends, just to give you a flash, because some of the panel members will come to them. The first and the fundamental, which Isha asked me to talk about, are demographics. 30 years ago, the worry in the world was there is going to be a population explosion. Remember, people said there'll be no food to eat. The Bangladeshis and the Indians will starve. You know where we are going now? By 2050, the world will be aging. Except for Africa and Middle East, every society will be aging. Many countries, China and Japan, will be into a period of declining population. India's own labor force will be declining by 2050. The trend of aging societies and declining population will be a global phenomena. Between now and 2050, fully 55% of population growth, from 7 billion to 9.7 billion. 55% growth will be sub-Sahara Africa. Rest of the world will be running out of labor force. Europe and Asia, East Asia. The question will be, I want to leave a question. Would the rest of the world accept 1.5 billion Africans as immigrants, or would the world move jobs to Africa? I just want to leave a question. Would we accept 500 million Africans as workers? Mr. Minister, a question to think about. Second, urbanization. Isha is an expert on that. We are going to see an avalanche of urbanization, particularly in Asia and Africa. Just 3 countries in the world, Nigeria, China, and India, 3 countries, will have an additional 1 billion people in urban areas. Where would the housing come from for these people? Shelter, I should say. Or would we have slums after slums as we are seeing in Africa? Not to talk about Mumbai, not to talk about Calcutta. Where would water supply come from? Would we see pollution? Where will be the urban transportation? Or would we have smart cities like the current government in India is talking about? Where would infrastructure financing come from? What kind of urban management we will have? Articles that Isha has been writing about. That's a big issue. And I would submit there is not going to be enough public sector money for that. We need to find new ways of management, new ways of funding. It's a global issue. Infrastructure is coming apart even in the US. So urbanization, quality of life are big issues. Otherwise, there's going to be a social explosion starting in Africa, but not only in Africa. Second issue. Globalization of international trade is what drove the growth in the last 60 years in Asia, but also the rest of the world. That is coming to be slowing down. Doha round has failed. So what is going to be the next spark for productivity growth? I'm afraid developing countries have to be the next force in making sure we have an open and fair global trading system. This time, the burden has to be carried by India and Brazil and African nations, because I'm afraid that we are not going to see the developed countries taking the lead in that. There's going to be talk about globalization of financial markets because there are new risks coming on that. A big force, which I think is not being discussed, is the rise of the middle class. There's going to be a huge increase in the middle class. Our own numbers indicate that by 2050, as much as 94% of the world may be in middle or upper middle class. We may have as much as 4 billion additional middle class and upper middle class consumers. Would the world have enough resources? Can the earth provide resources for that despite technological progress? I'm not so sure. Ram Agarwal is here. He's written papers on that, and you can ask him questions on that. The issue of competition of natural resources is a huge issue for the world, combined with climate change. But we're going to talk about that, so I will not touch on that. That's a big, big issue for our generation. And linked with that is technology progress, but I think Montek is going to talk about that. The ninth one, which is not mentioned, I worry about quite a lot, just because of what's happening in our neighborhood, in the Middle East, in Syria, and Africa. That is a threat from non-violent state actors. And it's the flip side of technology. I'll just use the short word ISIS. This is the new phenomena. It could be an ultimate threat to the so-called prosperity of the world. And the third megatrend, last megatrend, the 10th one, is the rise of the emerging markets. It's a positive thing. That's our bottom line. That's our central scenario, that it is possible that by 2050, the emerging markets, the so-called emerging markets of the world of today, could account for as much as 70% of global GDP. And under that scenario, Mr. Minister, it is quite possible that the three largest economies of the world, possible, not projected, the three largest economies of the world in PPP terms could be in this order: China, India, and the US. In that order. Interestingly enough, leaving at our GDP in terms of living standards, and I was shocked myself by our model, shocked that 84 countries in the world, 5.8 billion people, could have income levels equal to or higher than the current per capita income of 4 southern European countries: Portugal, Spain, Italy, and Greece. 5.8 billion people, 84 countries. Can you imagine that? Just in 34 years from today. That's in front of us. That's the prize. The question is, are we ready to grab it? Are we ready to work for it? And the answer lies in Asia. Answer lies in China, India, Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Myanmar, Bangladesh. And that's our job. And the 4 big issues I just want to leave: inequality, climate change, need to change our lifestyle instead of pursuing more and more material wealth and consumption, and finally, fighting terrorism and fundamentalism. Thank you, Isha.
Thank you, Harinder. Thank you very much. You heard the mega trends. I wanted to wait for Harinder to finish to say something, or rather repeat something, which I said in Paris as an intervention from the floor. There's one big mega trend missing from this book. What kind of world we are going to have in 2050 depends on what sort of role women have in that world. I think what is missing from this chapter is the dynamic role that women can play if societies can reform themselves. And as you all know, I am not speaking as someone who works on women's issues, but I have no doubt that the quality of life depends critically on how we educate and empower our women and allow them to play a role in helping move to that world that you've sketched. With those words, let me first invite the minister to release the book and then speak. So first, the book. Let me give this one to the author. Please, this is for you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ahluwalia. And personal thanks for also giving me this opportunity, because I would have really missed out on it if I hadn't come here today. Thank you for also sending me the book well in time so that I could get a chance to, I can't claim that I've read the whole book, but certainly go through it and truly a remarkable piece of work. A heavyweight intellectual, if I may say, thought leadership that Mr. Harinder Kohli and the rest of the authors, including the illustrious Montek, have put in. And I must acknowledge it has set my mind thinking on a lot of things. So thank you very much, Harinder ji, for bringing to India your thoughts, bringing this piece of art for all of us to also deliberate on, think about. And thank you, Mr. Sivaramakrishnan, for truly publishing a wonderful book. I'm sure Mr. Ninan and Arunabha will also add a lot of value to the deliberations as we go forward. And of course, such an illustrious and distinguished set of people in the room today. I think this can get very, very exciting as the evening progresses. Just at the outset, to set the record straight, Isharji, even I value my academic pursuits more than my ministership. Because that's what's going to stay with me. And amongst tumultuous times, ministerships may come and go, but I do hope my knowledge and whatever God has given me remains with me to be able to serve society. In fact, as you were saying it, I was recalling, it was at the turn of the millennium, from 28 December to 3rd or 4th of January. I had the privilege to join a group of professors from several eminent universities across the world. The current dean of Harvard Business School, Dr. Noria, had put together some professors from all across the world, Wharton and Stanford and his own HBS. He was not the dean those days. And we booked the Palace on Wheels. And we spent a whole week together. I was the only non-academic on that train. And it was on that train journey that a very eminent economist, somebody I always looked up to, I thought would have one day won a Nobel Prize, and somebody who came out of the public sector companies in India and went on to become a very illustrious economist, Sumantra Ghoshal, was on that journey with me. And after discussing a particular paper, which I will also talk about just now, and I don't know how coincidences come up that you mentioned about academics, and I thought I must bring that out. Sumantra told me roughly at the end of that journey, so I would say 2nd or 3rd of January, whatever the Wednesday was, because the Palace on Wheel ends on a Wednesday. He said, Piyush, you may earn 500 crores. And I'll tell you the reference of 500 crores that day. Rajesh Jain had then sold his internet startup for 500 crores, which was a huge sum of money in 1999. And Dr. Noria and I were arguing. I was saying it's a damn good deal. And Nitin was saying that, he undersold, he should have waited some more. So that's where the reference of 500 crore came in. And Sumantra told me that, Piyush, you may earn 500 crores in your life, but your calling in life is to be in public service, to be in politics. And you'll never get happiness until you get into the political arena more actively and more forcefully. And in some sense, he passed away a few years after that, and I think we lost a true son of the soil who was passionate about India, even though he was teaching in London. But that has always reverberated in my mind, and when Prime Minister Modi invited me to join government, by coincidence, both my kids were in Delhi that day. It was summer vacations. And we had many hours of deliberations on what it calls for. I still remember a conversation where I was telling my daughter that it will mean change in lifestyle. And a lot of compromises on what we used to do in our private business life, where we could make much larger amounts of money, and what it will mean like living off the interest you earn out of your savings. And I'm happy that I chose this, because I do believe after 2 years in government that the impact one always desired to make in society, the difference one always thought you want to do, you want to give back to society, can truly be achieved if you are willing to do an honest day's job, if you are willing to bite the bullet on more occasions than one. And around that period when I was transitioning from a more skewed business career to a skew towards politics, Suman Berry was a part of that journey when I was on the board of State Bank, and we were both on the board together. And I wouldn't be surprised if you may recall some of our conversations of those days. But in some sense, what Harinder ji has talked about also brought faint memories of a paper I had given to Prime Minister Vajpayee sometime in June of 2000. And that paper also was an outcome. I think, Gajendra ji, I've shared that paper with you. That paper was the outcome of a book I had read somewhere end of 99. When I first got attracted towards the China story, was John Nesbitt's Megatrends, where he had first articulated the 10 megatrends which had impacted the American economy first. And then he wrote about the Chinese megatrends. It's the Chinese megatrends which had attracted me at that time. And what John had written at that time, relevant to what he saw happening in China, had prompted me to write a paper to Mr. Vajpayee, suggesting that India goes down the urbanization road and create 100 mega cities in the country. In fact, I picked out that note also. I'll leave a copy with you, just for thinking about how things remained relevant way back in 2000. We are now in 2016. Only reinforcing what you just said, that time flies. One could, in a way, feel that it's only 35 years more. But it's a sword that cuts two ways. It could either be 35 short years, or it could be 35 long years. That's the choice the people of India have to make. And I think that's the choice all of us thought leaders, all of us well-meaning people who God and opportunity has gifted with education, with knowledge, and who can actually impact our country's future. How each one of us decides our role in the emerging India will determine whether what I read in the book and what you have just articulated comes true, how much of it comes true. Ishwarji, I cannot but agree with you more that the power of women, and we've seen some of that happen, for example, in Bangladesh, where the Grameen Bank revolved around unleashing the power of women over there, the self-help groups of women. And in some sense, we are seeing it now in India as we move towards direct benefit transfer, something that Montek ji, you started while you were in the Planning Commission, the articulation of taking benefits directly to the people. I believe Gajendra ji was a part of your team in all those efforts. The way we are trying to see if we can empower women through the Mudra Yojana with small loans, which can help them stand, be independent, be self-sufficient, maybe start small entrepreneurial businesses. It could be as simple as making pickle and papad. But truly, women would have an important role to determine the destiny of this nation, or possibly even of the world. And personally, I have no doubt in my mind that the women of this country have the ability to become change agents. I've seen my own mother have a deep impact in an area which, to my mind, is the worst slum to live in Mumbai. We all have heard of Dharavi. But if you ask me, Dharavi is a relatively much better off slum than the slums of a place called Antop Hill. It's in Mumbai, which literally every year goes underwater. It's on the foreshore land. Every monsoon it literally sinks. So after the monsoon you create new infrastructure and only waiting for the next monsoon to sink. But I do believe what Prime Minister Modi today is talking about, Swachh Bharat, is something I remember my mother focusing on. So MLAs would get a small fund They still do get, but those days it was much smaller. She spent the entire money building toilets for women in those slum areas. And I believe that had a larger impact in that area than creating roads or footpaths or any of the other facilities that would normally be developed in a slum area. So I do fully resonate with your thoughts on the power of women to make a difference. And in some sense, what I remember reading from John Naisbitt's book about the emerging Chinese economy, a large part of that revolved around urbanization and the impact that urbanization had on the growth in China. It has had certain negative impacts also. Today we see in China certain areas of deep concern, climate change or pollution being one of them. In China we see the income disparities probably aggravating even more than what we have in India. And it's also been a function of large amounts of corruption. It's also been a function of the fact that the Chinese economy grew on the back of a very weak banking system. And I call it a weak banking system because there was indiscriminate lending at one point of time, a lot of which today is coming home to roost. It's still not recognized by the world as such, but a person like Suman would be able to analyze and maybe help us understand what is the deep-rooted malaise that the Chinese banking system has and how that could impact the global scenario in the years ahead. And an unfortunate collapse, let's say, of the banking system like we saw in 2008 in America. And events such as this can often change destiny of nations, more particularly the destiny of emerging nations such as India. Because we are at the long end of the stick where we can get beaten much faster. And we won't have the resilience to be able to face those challenges. So in some sense, the 10 megatrends that you have articulated in your book are relevant, are extremely important for all of us to reflect on. I personally chose 3 trends on which I thought I would talk. Also referring to the Chinese experience, and I've been reading the Chinese story very closely because in some sense I see that we have a situation where we have a huge rural population underemployed, similar to what China was going through. Quality of education is a matter of concern. I was at my son's school. He just graduated on the 26th of last month, same day that I completed 2 years. And one of the Chinese students who spoke at the graduation ceremony spoke about his own background where he lived in a village which didn't have electricity, which didn't have water. They would have to go 3 or 4 kilometers to get water in their homes. No proper shelter. And as I was hearing that boy and how he has come out of that and reached Harvard for his science studies, was truly an inspiring story. And possibly that's why he was chosen to speak at the graduation. That itself is a very prestigious opportunity. And in some sense, we in India have these similar challenges that we have to address. We don't have the luxury of time. We have nearly 150 districts, Montek ji, which is grappling with left-wing extremism, Maoism, tendencies moving towards, I would not call it full-fledged terrorism, but certainly towards wanting to attack the system, wanting to fight the system, wanting to break the system. And in that sense, demographics, which is an important trend that you have articulated, while it can be a great boon, it can be equally a bane. It could equally be a disaster for the country unless we channelize that demographic dividend in the right direction and we strengthen the youth of tomorrow with significant empowerment. And that empowerment will only come with proper infrastructure and electricity and power being an important ingredient of any game-changing impact we want to have on the youth of tomorrow, on quality of education, where technology can play an important impact or can impact the way we take good quality and more holistic education to the doorstep in the rural areas. And from within that, help people not go to the beaten track. I've just come from Kota, by the way, today. So you can imagine what I have experienced in Kota, where 150,000 students are preparing through coaching and education institutes to get to appear for IIT entrance exam or medical exams or chartered accountancy. Now, while one can take pride in the fact that these people, and most of them come from humble backgrounds and have a very big desire to go and study in Kota and hopefully get into the IITs and IIMs of the world. But the very fact that they cannot get that education in their own areas, the fact that they have to go to a education hub where I don't think we are giving them quality education. We are giving them education by rote. We are giving them education focused to performing well in an examination, focused to preparing for the questions that will possibly be asked, is certainly no way to develop a society. Not that we can write off what's happening in Kota, but we'll certainly as a nation have to ponder and deliberate on how we want the education system of tomorrow to prosper for this nation. And in that sense, while we have a young demography today, I appreciate your point with growing awareness. This will turn into an aging population. You said that probably 51% of the world population would be an aging population or coming largely from Africa and the Indian subcontinent, India, China. Matter of serious concern for all of us. And that will lead us down the path of Europe, where today pensions has become the biggest challenge. And we don't know what will be the shape of their economies in the years to come. How they will be able to handle the stress of increasing social security budgets. And in that sense, we are making a humble effort to try and empower our youth, trying to improve the education system. A small point that was told to me yesterday, it's for all of us to think. While we may have eliminated examinations up to the 10th standard and said there should be an automatic progression, let the student go up to the 10th standard. But we are all aware of all the studies, the ICRIER study and all, which demonstrate that an 8th class student is not able to read a 3rd or 4th class textbook. And whether it makes sense to send a child right up to the 10th standard, who may not necessarily be prepared adequately, not tested along the route, possibly not stopped along the route to prepare himself better to go up the steps up the ladder. And by the time he graduates out of high school, is prepared to face the challenges that come his way. Rather than have a society where even degrees are bought and sold, or ranks are bought and sold. I can assure you the Chartered Accountancy Institute and Mumbai University still are quite conscious and cautious about their rankings. But what we've just heard about happening in Bihar, and has been a matter of debate for the last 2 or 3 days. Top ranking students having to go back to the examination center for improprieties. And in some sense, what you wrote in your book, and for the benefit of all of us, just like to read out a para which I asked my colleagues to literally transcribe for me because I thought it was very relevant in the Indian context. By 2050, and you just mentioned it, the world will have some 9.7 billion people compared to 7.3 billion in 2015. Over half of the net increase will be in Africa. All regions of the world will have aging societies except for Africa and the Middle East. This sharp divergence in the demographic trends, combined with difficulties in creating jobs for Africa's bulging youth population, will pose unprecedented challenges to the global community. The world will either have to learn to live with an aging and eventually shrinking population or accept large-scale immigration. And why I picked this out is that this is where we stand today. While we may be in the mega trends looking at this picture for Africa in 2050, this is relevant for India today. That's where we need to give them better vocational training. That's where Kaushal Vikas or skill development can have a major impact on how we develop our youth for tomorrow. That's where it's important that the innate entrepreneurial spirit of Indian youth, coming up with new technologies, coming up with new ideas, needs to be unleashed to help them become the entrepreneurs to create new jobs. Governments of the day are not going to be able to provide the jobs that you are worried about in Africa in 2050. I'm worried about in India in 2016. And in some sense, a lot of effort, a lot of thought is going into this subject in India today. And I do hope, with the combined effort of all of us, well-meaning Indians, well-meaning citizens, citizens blessed with knowledge and opportunity to serve, will be able to actually contribute to saving us from the kind of problems that you have said could happen in the years to come. One mega trend which I have picked out also because it's very deeply personal for me, for my Prime Minister, and we have all seen the leadership that India provided during the COP21 negotiations in Paris. In fact, on a personal note, I had the opportunity to be in Paris since we were launching the International Solar Alliance on 30th of November on the sidelines of the inaugural. And that 24 hours that I spent in Paris with the Honorable Prime Minister was truly encouraging, but more importantly, it gave the, if I may call myself young relative to the rest of us on this, and of course Arunabha. But for a young person, that was truly a moment of joy, a moment of pride. What I saw in Paris, the way world leaders literally queued up to meet with the Prime Minister, to interact with him, to share thoughts with him, packing in those 24 hours the amount of bilaterals that different Prime Ministers and Presidents sought was truly challenging. In fact, Shinzo Abe-san sought a meeting at the last minute, and the only slot they were able to fit in clashed with the bilateral with President Obama. He was gracious enough to defer it by 15 minutes. So Prime Minister and Shinzo Abe-san were huddled in a conversation, and Japan and India shared some similar interests and similar thoughts on climate change, particularly when it comes to utilizing coal and the possibilities on nuclear power. So possibly that meeting went on a little longer. And while the American side was holding back President Obama, the American style is far more informal. So Secretary Kerry and President Obama actually came to the meeting venue, where Prakash Javadekar and I were both already there. And the four of us sat chatting for almost half an hour before the Prime Minister came in. And if at all anybody is interested in knowing what is meant by chappani chhati, a 56-inch chest, that was the moment, for me at least, where I truly felt like representing a nation of 56-inch chest, because you could literally see the leadership role of India at Paris, and the fact that even a world leader like President Obama was trying to convince Prakash Javadekar, our Honorable Environment Minister, and me, how India has to lead the global effort towards a better future for the next generation, towards addressing the concerns of climate change. And I'm happy, Harinderji, that you have chosen to take this as an important and integral element of everybody's future. 2050 is going to be largely determined by what happens in our joint effort towards climate change. And I'm delighted that you also spoke about lifestyles. In chapter 16 of your book, you've talked about sustainable lifestyles. And that's precisely the biggest contribution of India to the Paris framework. We've finally been able to bring in the Paris Agreement, the fact that the world will have to recognize and will have to be conscious of consumption and waste, and will have to move towards sustainable lifestyles. In fact, every city I go to, ever since I joined government, earlier it used to look very beautiful. Now it hurts to see 100-story buildings fully lit up the whole night with not one person working in the office, lit up for the beauty of it. After all, that's electricity wasted. Huge amounts of electricity. Most of it still coming from coal, spewing out greenhouse gases, carbon emissions. Most of those lights, and as I see them, it pains me further, are not even LED. So they consume 7 times the electricity that an LED bulb would otherwise consume. In fact, at the White House, I was walking around the White House one morning in Washington. All the street lights were on in broad daylight at 9 o'clock in the morning. And I took pictures and showed it to the powers that be, to tell them that, look, you are telling us all sorts of things. You're telling us to close down coal mining and coal plants. Why don't you first stop this waste right under your nose? And I think the world now is recognizing that climate change will be something that will have to be a joint effort. All of us in the world will have to work towards it, while at the same time a country like India cannot afford to compromise on its development imperative also. After all, we need to provide jobs for the teeming millions. We need to have more agriculture. We need to ensure food security, while recognizing that climate change can impact all of this also. Will be the delicate balance that India will have to